Hey there, it's Clara from AcuPro Academy, and this video is all about the 8 principles. So this is an introduction to TCM diagnosis made easy because I always like to make things easy, simple, and fun. That's literally what I want to really portray when it comes to TCM. So if you need anything else, check out my website, acuproacademy.com. I got tons of resources there, including tons of treatment principle for different disorders, free courses, as well as continuing education credit courses, and tons of fun TCM stuff. Also, check out my Facebook page. I post daily at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Tons of fun, enjoyable little posts. I'm also on Instagram at acuproacademy.com. At AcuPro Academy. Pretty much that's it for my Instagram account, and you can connect there as well. So without further ado, let's start the intro to TCM diagnosis with the 8 principles. So before we start talking about the 8 principles, I wanted to talk about TCM diagnosis in general and the methods we use to diagnose a patient. So the main methods are, as you can see, all those methods described in front of you. So inquiry is basically the biggest or the one that's going to take us the most time when we do our first initial consultation. Inquiry is collecting general data, then going in depth, of course, which we try to do with as many details as possible on the chief complaint, so why the person or the patient is here, the duration, the onset, the characteristic, the location, what makes it worse, what makes it better. Then we ask detailed questions on all the other systems, including digestive system, reproductive, musculoskeletal, and much, much more. So this is a really big part of the TCM diagnosis, putting the clues together and specifically asking questions. So the inquiry is a big one. The second one that we use a lot as well is observation, right? Looking at the patient. And so we, of course, look at the tongue to use that as a tool of diagnosis. We look at the tongue color, the shape, the moisture, and the coating. We also look at skin, right? The skin issue, the skin color. We observe the face, the eyes, the lips, the ears, the nose, the hair, the nails, but also the patient's demeanor, right? Is the patient looking like they have energy and they're really hyper? Or is the patient looking like they are very weak, very soft-spoken, and they look tired, right? So looking at the patient and observing our skills, using our skills of observation, will give us more clues to help make a full TCM diagnosis. Palpation is another method of diagnosis in TCM, which we do 2 things with palpation. Of course, the big one that we use a lot is palpating the pulse, or taking the pulse on the wrist area of each wrist, because we're looking mostly not just for the rapidity or the speed of the beat, but we're looking for the quality of the pulse and the depth of the pulse. So this is a whole lecture on itself, but the pulse is a very big part of TCM diagnosis. And of course, we palpate the body, right? For tenderness, for pain, for swelling. We want to figure out what's going on underneath. So palpating is a big part of TCM. And then the last 2, which are not as big, but they're still very important as well, not as emphasized as the other one, but a big small part, if you will, a big small part of TCM diagnosis. So olfaction or smelling is a small part of TCM, but it still should not be overlooked. And sometimes if a patient has a sweet smell, it may help us look for clues for diabetes, for example. And then the other one is auscultation. Auscultation is listening, right? So listening to the patient's breathing for congestion, for example, or the sound of their voice being very weak can help us in determining what may be out of balance, right? So listening, smelling, small part, but still should not be overlooked. So those are all the method of TCM diagnosis we are going to use to be able to help a patient and treat a patient. So let's start with looking at the pattern of differentiation and making a proper TCM diagnosis. How do we go about this? We have many ways to do this. The basic way is what we're going to do today. It's talking about the 8 principles. Using the 8 principles to try to make a diagnosis is literally the basis of Chinese medicine diagnosis. So yin and yang, hot and cold or heat and cold, internal versus external, and excess versus deficiency. That's what this lecture is all about. Once we have used the 8 principle, we can look at going more in depth. We can use the 5-element theory. We can use the 4 vital substances, which are qi, blood, body fluid, essence. With the 5-element theory, a diagnosis in 5-element would be wood over-controlling earth, or liver over-controlling spleen, for example, which means probably a liver that's being stressed and that's depleting the digestive system or the spleen. Using the 4 vital substances, we can, of course, form a diagnosis and say this person is qi deficient or blood deficient or they have blood stagnation, right? This is a form of diagnosis. We also use very much the zangfu organ. So if the heart is in trouble in TCM, a TCM heart could have fire. So heart fire is a zangfu organ diagnosis. We can also use the pathogenic factors, and those are wind, cold, heat, fire, damp, dry, and summer heat. So the 6 pathogenic factors, or the pathogens that invade the body from external part or external to internal, right, are something that we can diagnose the patient with. So for example, when a patient has a sunburn, for us, that's external pathogen invasion of heat or fire, depending how the degree of the sunburn is on the skin. We use also the 6 stages. So the 6 stages is a big lecture using the stages that are really related to the meridian, like the Tai-Yang stage and the Yang-Min stage and the Shao-Yang stage, Tai-Yin, Shao-Yin, Jue-Yin. This is, again, a big lecture to try to diagnose specifically when a pathogen enters the body and at which level is the pathogen located at this stage. The other one, which is very closely related, is the 4 levels. So the 4 levels are Wei Qi, which is defensive Qi, Qi level, Yin level or nutritive level, and blood level. So this is when heat penetrates the body and at which level of the body the heat has penetrated. And if the heat penetrates deeper, the problem is worse, of course, right? So that's using that method of diagnosis, again, with external pathogen invasion. And then the 3 jiaos, the upper jiao, the middle jiao, and the lower jiao, can also help us determine what's going on within the organs internally. So all those methods of diagnosis in TCM are used. And today we're going to start with the basic one, which is the 8 principles, because that's an easy one to use when you diagnose. Because after all, nothing is harder than TCM diagnosis. That is probably the hardest thing. Because once you get the diagnosis, it's easy to divide or to form a treatment plan. But doing the right or forming the right diagnosis takes a lot of practice. So the last one was the meridian. Yeah, I should have said that, obviously, but meridians are used as well for diagnosis as well. I should have said that. My bad. So the 8 principles are those 8 little ones: yin versus yang, deficiency versus excess, cold versus heat, and internal versus external. So the 8 principles are really the basics of Chinese medicine diagnosis. When seeing a patient for the first time, always start with the 8 principle. And then you can elaborate and go deeper and use the other methods, like the zangfu organ methods, right? Or using the pathogen invasion methods. So, but start with the 8 principle. So the idea is to look, is a patient more excess or deficient? Is this more of a heat issue or a cold issue? Is the problem more internal or external? So in the end, is the diagnosis more yin or more yang? Okay, so this is a simple, easy way to start TCM diagnosis. As we know, most patients, unfortunately, are much more complicated with many different patterns of excess and deficiency. Some people can have upper heat and lower cold, meaning they're hot at the top, and the cold at the bottom, like cold feet, fatigue, heavy legs, right? And then at the top, they can't sleep, they feel hot flash maybe, if it's someone with menopause, irritable, there's lots of heat on the top, but there is definitely some cold at the bottom. So that's more complicated pattern, right? So a lot of people may have internal issue and external issue as well. But we're going to try to start with the basics of differentiating those 8 principles. So let's look at exterior. Exterior part for the 8 principle affect the skin, the muscles, the channels, mostly the Wei Qi or the defensive Qi. Acute conditions caused by pathogenic factors like wind heat, wind cold, damp heat, damp cold, and slower onset affecting the channels like arthritis, right? So those are what external exterior conditions are. Exterior conditions are going to affect the skin, the muscle, and the channels. So things that are more acute, like when we have a cold or a flu or an allergic reaction with lots of rashes on the body, that is external. Or if it's affecting the channels, it's more chronic, but it's slow onset. It takes a time, like arthritis, for example, or a skin condition that may be like eczema or psoriasis. Versus interior. Interior affects the organs, right? The yin organ, the yang organ. Mostly chronic conditions are internal or interior in nature, okay? And they may be caused by many things, from emotions to diet to lifestyle to weak constitution like genetics, etc. So interior conditions are usually much more chronic, affecting the organs. Excess versus deficiency. So excess usually affected or is affected by pathogenic factors and the body not being weak, right? The body is not weak and we have excess pathogenic factor, let's say excess heat, excess cold in the body, right? Excess dampness in the body versus deficiency. Deficiency is usually there's no pathogenic factors, so there's no damp and there's no heat. It's just a weakness of the body. The body is getting depleted and becomes weaker. That's the difference between excess and deficiency. Excess and deficiency may be found often in patients, right? Both excess in one part and deficiency in another part. So if the pathogenic factor lingers too long, the condition will become chronic and be deficient, complicated with excess, right? So it is often normal, or it's often common for patients to have excess and deficiency, unfortunately, which makes it harder to treat. Heat versus cold. So heat can be excess heat, which means excess yang, or deficiency, which comes from a yin deficiency, right? So excess heat means we have too much heat in the house, and then deficiency means we are deficient in the cooling system. So the AC in the house or the air conditioning in the house is much, much more broken, or it doesn't work, and so we are hot as well. So it can come from an excess or a deficiency. Cold is the same thing. Excess cold, which is excess yin, means that we have too much cold, right? Like we have the AC blasting in our body. Or deficiency, meaning that we don't have a heating system in our body. It's broken, or we don't have a fireplace, or we don't have anything to heat up our house. So we're deficient. It's deficient. It's not working. So now we're cold. So that's pretty much the difference between the two. And of course, yin and yang, which is the last of the 8 principle, is generalizing the other 6 principle, right? Is this more of a yin or a yang problem, issue, condition? All right? So let's look at the difference between deficiency versus excess in symptoms, so we can differentiate those. The length of the disease. So something that's long, that lasts a long time, that's chronic, is usually more a deficiency. And excess is usually more short and acute. Does it mean that all excess condition are acute? No. We're just comparing acute versus chronic and long versus short. Okay, I just want to really emphasize that someone can have an excess, definitely an excess chronic condition, like excess heat in the body or excess dampness, that's chronic. But we're just comparing two things, right? Chronic versus acute. Chronic is more deficiency, acute is more excess. Usually someone that's deficient is more weak, right? More fatigued, more weakened. Someone that's excess is more strong, hyper, has a lot of energy, and maybe too much energy. Someone that's fatigued again or deficient is fatigue as in it's very hard for them to focus. They're tired mentally, obviously physically as well for the energy, but for mind, definitely tired mentally. Someone that's excess, they're very restless mentally, very difficult for them to sleep because they're very agitated. Someone that is deficient will have a very weak voice with low and no energy to it. It's like, it's an effort to actually speak. That's a deficiency, weak, low voice. With a strong, loud voice, you can hear me now? That's an excess, right? Someone that is really loud all the time, that's very excess. Can you tell which one I am? If we look at pain, deficiency pain usually is more dull. It's not as bad. It's just more of an ache. And it's the person loves the massage, right? If you rub them or massage them, they really love it because it's just an ache. So they really enjoy that. Someone that has excess do not want to be touched, right? The pain is really strong. It's really stabbing and very strong, and touching them makes it worse. It's like they don't want to be touched, right? So that will give you an idea of the difference. The pulse, of course, a deficiency person will have a weak, thin pulse, maybe sometimes deep, right? So the pulse will have no strength to it. It will be very weak, very thin, and then probably deep in some cases as well, depending on the deficiency. An excess pulse is very strong. It's full. It's bounding. It's forceful. It's pushing against your fingers. So it's big. It's large. That would be the difference. Okay? So those are the difference between excess versus deficiency symptoms to help us figure out the diagnosis. So if we look at this, this is a picture of yang excess versus yin deficiency. So this is excess versus deficiency looking at heat itself, right? So heat versus cold. So this is more of a yang excess, too much heat, or the AC not working. Yin deficiency, meaning your cooling system is not working, so you're still feeling hot. So what I'd like to say when I look at those pictures is that when you have yang excess, the symptoms are very big. When you have yin deficiency, the symptoms are smaller. So they're not as big. So I'm going to show you what that feels like or what that looks like when we look at yang excess versus yin deficiency in symptoms. So big versus small. So for the face, for example, someone that has yang excess or excess heat has the face that is red. The whole face is red. But someone that's yin deficiency only has red cheeks. Okay, just a little part, not the whole thing. So big versus small. When it comes to thirst, someone that has excess yang loves cold drinks and is going to gulp and gulp and gulp, while someone that's yin deficient will sip the cold drinks. They both want cold drinks because they're hot, but the yin deficiency, small sips, the yang excess, big gulp. When it comes to the taste in the mouth, yang excess people may have a bitter taste in the mouth, while yin deficiency people won't have any. Yang excess, big, feels hot all the time, all day, all the time. While yin deficiency people only feel hot late afternoon, evening, like after kind of 5 o'clock when it gets dark, and at night, right? So yin time, nighttime, evening time, that's when the person is hot, while the yang excess is all day. Yang excess would have high fever. Not everybody's going to have all those symptoms, you understand that. If it's an acute yang excess, then someone may have high fever, right? If it's a chronic, they probably wouldn't. But if you look at fever itself, a yang excess has high fever. A yin deficiency has low-grade fever. So low-grade fever means they're not really having a fever that much. They just really, the temperature elevates a little bit, and specifically at night, okay? The mind is very, very agitated with yang excess, very restless. With yin deficiency, it's just more anxious. So it's hard. We can't see if the person is anxious. It's a lot in their mind. The agitated mind of the yang excess will show more in their behavior and the way they handle themselves. Bowel movement. So with excess heat, there's going to be constipation. It's going to dry the bowel movement, so it's going to be constipation, but no abdominal pain. Okay? The bowel or the stools will be large and formed when the person has a bowel movement. With a yin deficiency, there will be still a bit of constipation, but the stools are going to be definitely dry stools. Okay? So we're going to have constipation with abdominal pain, ouch, and bowel movement that is a stool that is formed and large. With yin deficiency, it's a small pebble sheep stools that are dry and there's no pain. When it comes to yang excess, we could have profuse bleeding. So if someone has very heavy bleeding, maybe nosebleeds or heavy menstruation bleeding, and they feel hot all the time, that's an excess yang. But if it's slight bleeding, like very light menstruation, let's say, with feeling hot just at night, that's usually more of a yin deficiency, for example. When it comes to sleep, obviously those people are hot. They're not going to sleep very well. So the yang excess people has dream disturbed sleep. It's going to definitely be invaded by a lot of dreams, vivid dreams that are going to wake up that person a few times. With the yin deficiency, they're going to wake up every hour. So they are tossing and turning all night, or they wake up at 4 a.m., right? They don't need to wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. They wake up quite early, and then so they can't fall back asleep. When it comes to the pulse, again, big versus small. So excess yang will have a floating pulse if it is an acute condition. If it's not an acute condition, it would be more full, but no matter what, it'll be rapid, right? So it's rapid, it's quite fast. If it's floating rapid, it will be more an acute condition. If it's full, big, large, and rapid, this is more a chronic condition. The yin deficiency person is a chronic condition, so it's going to be rapid as well, but a thin pulse. It's going to feel so thin under the fingers. The tongue, again, big versus small, red tongue for both, but yang excess will have a coat, a yellow coat on top of the tongue, while the yin deficiency will not have any coat. It'll be peeled and very thin tongue. Okay, so no coat, peeled tongue, maybe cracked, sometimes some cracked, but very thin tongue in the tongue itself. Treatments is different. Of course, that's why it's important to differentiate the heat coming from excess or from deficiency. The treatment for excess heat is there's too much, we need to clear it, get rid of it. So clear heat using points like stomach 44, large intestine 11. With yin deficiency, we want to nourish the yin. We want to try to clear a little bit the deficiency heat, but nourish the yin. We want to try to fix it, repair it. So we can use points like kidney 3 or kidney 6 or kidney 7. Those are great points. Or spleen 6 for yin deficiency. All right. The other side of the coin is looking at cold excess versus cold deficiency. So yin excess versus yang deficiency. So this is a little bit different. The first one when we talked about heat, we talked about big versus small. When it comes to yin excess versus yang deficiency, the symptoms are more pain versus weakness. Okay, so that is very different when you look at the symptoms per se. So let's look at the symptoms themselves. Yin excess or too much AC in your house versus yang deficiency, meaning you don't have heat in your house and you're freezing because it's cold because there's no fireplace. So looking at the face, someone that has excess cold, when they have excess cold, cold congeals. It stops blood circulation. It's like an ice cube and the blood can't go through it. So when we have excess cold, it usually creates some blood stagnation. So if there's blood stagnation, there's going to be purple color, right? So excess yin, there's going to be a face that has maybe purplish blue into it, maybe purplish blue lips or circle under the eyes that are more purplish blue. That's an excess yin for the face itself. For yang deficiency people, there's also no circulation, not enough circulation to move fluids because there is a lack of heat. So the fluid stops moving, the circulation slows down. And so the yang deficiency has no heat. So very pale, right? No fire, so very pale. And then puffy because there's water retention because the fluids are not being circulated. So excess yin is going to have a sharp, strong, stabbing pain. Wherever that's going to be, it's going to be local. And it's going to be worse on pressure. The person does not like pressure. Okay? Versus a yang deficiency, if they have pain, it's going to be an ache, very mild. So let's say low back pain, which feels really good with a massage and some heat, right? For example, yin excess would be maybe having really, really, really sharp menstruation pain or cramps. That is, the person doesn't want to be touched. They don't like the pressure. They don't want to be touched, right? Or someone has pain in the glutes due to sciatica, and it's worse on pressure. They don't want to be massaged. They don't want to be touched. It's worse. It's always good on heat, but it's really sharp, painful, stabbing, local pain. When it comes to bowel movement, excess yin people will definitely feel better after the bowel movement. It's like, oh, I feel better. While the yang deficiency people usually will feel tired after bowel movement, and yang deficiency people have tendency to have more loose stools or diarrhea, and so after it, they'll feel tired. They feel like they need to rest and they need to sit down because it was very tiring. Again, yin excess is more pain, and then yang deficiency is more weakness, right? That's why they feel tired after bowel movement. So feeling cold, of course, both people feel cold. The yin excess, if it's an acute condition like frostbites or hypothermia, right? It's invasion of cold. The person can't warm up. It takes a long time. It's very difficult for them to warm up. It would take a long time for them to warm up. If it's a chronic condition like local cold, let's say sciatica, and the area is really cold to the touch, right? Let's say the sciatica is on the glutes and it's very cold to the touch, and the person feels like they can't warm up, okay? Now, if it's a yang deficiency, the person that's yang deficient is always kind of cold all over the body. It's not just local, okay? So not like frostbite, which is very local, or sciatica, which is local. It's all over the body, right? Feeling cold. But if you put them in a sauna or you give them warm clothes and put them all covered up, they warm up. So it's easy for them to warm up. They just need to be cuddled up, right? While someone with excess yin, very difficult to warm up, and it's local cold area. The mind. So someone that's excess yin gets frustrated very easily because they're stagnated, they're stuck, right? So cold congeal, like I said, and stop blood circulation. Someone that's yang deficient has no fire. So mentally, they kind of feel blah. They can feel depressed at some point, for sure, no energy at all. For when it comes to sleep, excess yin people sleep quite well. They have no problem as long as they're warm, specifically if their hands and toes are warm, they feel fine. If they're cold in some local area like toes or fingers, then it's harder, right? With yang deficiency people, they want to sleep all the time because they have no fire, no heat, right? So they just want to curl up into themselves and lay in bed and sleep all the time. We need to give them fire back. The pulse. Excess yin people would have a tight pulse because everything is congealed and stagnated, right? If it's an acute condition, let's say like hypothermia or frostbite or whatnot, then it's going to be floating. If it's not an acute condition, if it's a chronic sciatica issue or chronic menstruation pain, which feels better with warmth, for example, not with pressure, but with warmth, then the pulse will be tight but not floating. Okay, be more the middle section. When it comes to the yang deficiency, against no fire, so the pulse is very deep, very weak, and it's slow because there's no heat to it. When it comes to the tongue, excess yin tongue will have purple because of the stagnation, but also bluish because that's the yin or the cold. So bluish purple tongue with a bit of a white coat on it. Specifically, if it's acute, there'll be a bit of a white coat. It depends if it's chronic, not necessarily a white coat, just bluish purple. Yang deficiency tongue, very pale. Again, no fire, so not going to be pink or red. It's going to be pale. Swollen because, again, the fluids are not being able to be circulated with usually a little bit of a wet coat on top of it. So treatment is, of course, we have to warm people for sure, but it's very different. The excess cold or excess yin, we need to scatter the cold, kind of like blast it, right, to try to break the ice cube. And then we need to move blood circulation. We need to have some blood circulation because cold makes blood stasis. So we need to move and then scatter or break the cold, which is different from yang deficiency. Yang deficiency, we need to tonify, get that fire back up. We need to warm the person, right? So it's very different treatment. That's why it's really important to differentiate between an excess and a deficiency. I hope that was useful. I hope you really enjoyed this made easy TCM diagnosis, the introduction with the basic 8 principle. Look at all the stuff you can find on my website. Connect with me on Facebook. I post every single day at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Some great fun videos or posts I create myself, or go on my website with all the TCM resources I have for you. And you can connect on Instagram if you wanted to at AcuPro Academy. I hope you have a fantastic day. Keep rocking it with TCM. You are, after all, a TCM rock star. Have a great day.